Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Ledger. I'm your host Mol Said. It's been a while, I know, but I hope you've all been doing great as we're back on a Parisian rendezvous for the monthly recap. This is a new addition to our show aimed at keeping you updated on the Ledger ecosystem and its latest news. We'll also be meeting some of our incredible partners and diving into their projects and initiatives. Now with the latest news, our CDO Charles Guillemet has just returned from Bitcoin Amsterdam, where he gave a fascinating keynote on the topic of Bitcoin governance. With the rising interest of institutions in Bitcoin, managing their access to the so-called digital gold is gaining paramount importance. Today we have Charles here with us to share his insights from the event, and we'll also pick his brain on the topic of Bitcoin institutional custody and governance. After Charles, we're excited to welcome Mike Schmidt from Brink.dev. He shed the light on the world of Bitcoin developers. Brink.dev is actually a non-profit that supports full-time Bitcoin core developers. These unsung heroes play a pivotal role in the health of the Bitcoin network. But that's not all, actually. From October 17th to November the 3rd, we're bringing back the BTC Orange Ledger Nano S Plus with an exciting discount. Even more importantly, for every one of these devices sold, we're donating $5 to the Brink.dev team to further support their community of developers. Now, let's get into the heart of the matter with Charles and learn about Bitcoin institutional governance. Here we go. Charles, good to have you on the show. You've just returned from Bitcoin Amsterdam, where you delivered a pretty interesting keynote. But before we dive into that, can you share with us your thoughts on the atmosphere of the event and maybe give us a few updates for the folks that didn't have the chance to be in Amsterdam?
Yeah, sure. Frankly, the atmosphere was pretty good, despite the northern weather, let's say. It was a little bit rainy. But apart from that, I think I really prefer bear market because you meet people who are really passionate about Bitcoin and who are building. You don't have much people who are only attracted by easy and fast money. Like this is not
Mm-hmm.
the purpose of this kind of conference. So I really prefer this kind of atmosphere. Nonetheless, this is true that when you discuss a little bit business with people, there was some slowdown for everyone. This is true. But apart from that, everyone is focused on building, and that was a cool atmosphere.
That's great to hear. So, what was the buzz in town? What's on the minds of the Bitcoin maxis at the moment?
It's pretty interesting that a lot of the new buzz, the new projects are around creating more logic on top of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
There was some similarity on what we see on Ethereum for a few years now. And I think there are three main project ID. The first one is ordinals, of course, which is the Bitcoin version for NFT. And you have like two other interesting ID, which are BitVM and Drive Chains. I can say a little bit about that. BitVM is some complex mechanism that allows to implement some kind of optimistic rollup for the
Mm-hmm.
listeners who are aware of optimism, like all this layer 2 running on Ethereum. So the idea of BitVM is to do something similar to that, but on Bitcoin. And
Mm-hmm.
what is elegant in a way, but it looks a little bit hacky for me also, is so on optimism and optimistic rollup, the idea is to be in a situation where we think everything goes well, but if ever someone is trying to cheat, there is a way to create a fraud proof, and the blockchain will verify your fraud proof, and if your fraud proof is correct, you can revert the state, and also there was some incentive mechanism around that. And the difficulty for Bitcoin is there is no like the in order to execute complex logic on Bitcoin, it's very limited because of the way Bitcoin is structured. It's not Turing complete and so on. And what they did with BitVM is a complex mechanism that allows to verify there's fraud proof. And if your fraud proof is correct, you would have to do like several transactions, and you can retrieve some collateral. So this is the high level idea of BitVM.
That's super interesting. So let me try to break this down. This is happening obviously on the Lightning Network or some sort of a Bitcoin layer 2, because if you're actually reverting a transaction, it means that you're changing the state of the blockchain, which is supposedly impossible with Bitcoin. So this is happening on some sort of like a Bitcoin equivalent of an Ethereum layer 2, if I'm not mistaken.
No, this is correct, and
Okay.
this is not Lightning. This is another layer two,
Okay.
but it uses the same mechanism. Like you open a channel with someone else, so this is a
Mm-hmm.
state channel, and then you will evolve this state according to the logic you want to implement, and then you have the fraud proof mechanism that allows you to retrieve the collateral that you put on this state channel, just in case the other party is trying to cheat.
Interesting. So yeah, similar to like optimistic rollups, everything's getting batched together, and then the transactions, once validated, batched and validated, get then transmitted to the
This is this is
main
the
chain.
this is the end state ID. But frankly,
Yeah.
we are very far from being able to implement this. For now, this is mostly like a research article, and I I'm not very optimistic on this idea because it's very complex to implement, and the fraud proof wouldn't be that easy to implement as well. But I think it's a good idea. It's interesting to see that the research progress. So we'll see. For now, I'm not
We'll
very
have
optimistic for this idea, but it's interesting.
we'll have to see where that goes. So
Exactly.
maybe we should get into your keynote. It had a pretty interesting title. How not to end up in jail. What's the story behind that title?
Yeah, it's a pro tip for everyone. How not to end up in jail. It's generally speaking, it's a good practice in life. Yeah, and I wanted to talk about governance.
Hmm.
As a Bitcoiner, you know that self-custody is something really important because it allows to implement permissionless money. For me, this is really the most interesting aspect of Bitcoin, permissionless money, and it's achieved through the decentralization of the consensus with the associated set of incentives that you give to miners. I won't go into these details. And self-custody, you own your value, and no one can prevent you to own it. But when you are an organization, it's more complex to define what is self-custody. It's not only about securing your private key. For instance, if you are an exchange, you don't want to put all the money of your customers on a nano. Not
Hmm.
because of security, like a nano is perfectly secure, even if you want to put billions on it, but mostly for the governance aspect. The operational risk associated to that is crazy. You don't want to have someone in your organization with nano, and this person would be able to spend billions alone. It's really really risky for organization, and that's why I think implementing governance is something really important. And if you don't do that, you might end up in like a mismanagement of funds, and at some point you might end up in jail. And this is, by the way, what happened to SBF with
FTX.
FTX. For now, this is only a trial, but what we discovered during this trial is a little bit frightening in terms of governance. Like that was really really not good. Not everyone, but a few people could access to all the funds, and by the way, they used it in a bad way, it seems. So yeah, governance is really important. And I had also another story in mind, which is Quadrica CX. I don't know if you remember. That was, I
Of
think, a
course,
Canadian
there's the
exchange.
Netflix documentary.
Oh yes, that's true. That's true. And the CEO just disappeared. Apparently, he was dead, but this is not that sure. And he was the only one to have an access to the funds, which is again not a good governance setup. So yeah, this is why I wanted to talk about that, and then I described a little bit the different options that you could implement on Bitcoin for the governance of the coin.
That's super interesting. So, first of all, Bitcoin governance, people mostly think about the on-chain governance, but you're here mainly talking about the governance of Bitcoin treasuries by institutions. So, the ability for an institution to actually govern its own treasury and not depend on one set of keys or a single source of failure that could walk away with the bank. Um, and that's super interesting. So, why do you see that as being a main channel challenge, especially in the current context? Obviously, you mentioned FTX and all of that, but is it related to the Bitcoin ETF, for instance? How is that going to come into play, and how is that landscape changing? In this phase of the market.
It's an interesting question and comment. So I see several challenges for the future of Bitcoin in the coming years, and governance is definitely one of them. Um, since I joined Ledger like more than almost 6 years ago now, we are thinking about institutional adoption. Like we all the time we think it comes, it comes. There are some institutional adoption, but it's more like crypto native company. But with this ETF thing, the spot ETF in the US that could be accepted, and as soon as there will be one, there will be 20 probably. I feel we are entering in the TradFi institutional adoption phase for Bitcoin, especially Bitcoin. Um, we used to say this for 6 years, but now I really think it's coming. And when we are talking with clients for our B2B solution, we see more and more clients coming from traditional finance, even banks. Banks are willing to offer Bitcoin to their customers, and they will need a strong governance. They are used to having a clear governance process. They are used to use high standards when it comes to security. Banks and traditional financial institutions are using HSM. Like all of this, they know this very well. And I think we are entering in the phase where they are entering into the market. Because back in the days, we discussed with banks and traditional finance, company, institution, and so on. But that was mostly like innovation team, and they just wanted to be part of the blockchain revolution. That was blockchain, not Bitcoin. But there was no real project, no real. They just wanted to be part of it, just to say we are working on this blockchain thing. But these days it's very different. We see this is the real teams that are building product, and they want to offer Bitcoin to their customers, either real Bitcoin, direct exposure to real Bitcoin, or derivative product as ETF. But in all cases, they will need to manage their Bitcoin, and they will need governance. There is no doubt about that.
Yeah, I mean, even if they issue ETFs as a financial instrument, there needs to be a custodian that actually holds the counter value of those ETFs in Bitcoin. And those treasuries will need to be managed. So that's what you're saying. And you basically touched on Ledger Enterprise, but some of our listeners might not be aware that Ledger has an enterprise product. Could you maybe explain that to those who are initiated? Like, what is the product? How does it work? And give us a bit about the services also that this product provides you access to.
Yeah, sure. Definitely, Ledger is very well known for the retail product, the Ledger Nano devices, Ledger Live, and so on, and less known for our B2B product, which is completely normal. And our B2B product is called Ledger Vault within Ledger Enterprise Services. And functionally speaking, Ledger Vault is really similar to Nano. This is a solution to manage your funds, to manage your Bitcoin, your Ethereum, and so on. And you want to manage them, you want to be in control. You want to have an access to the key. You want to secure them. It's even more important for financial institutions because they are potentially storing billions. So this is what we built. But on top of that, we have built a governance framework which is very flexible. And as an organization, they will define different roles. You have administrators, you have operators, and as an administrator, you will define a set of rules. For instance, you will say this specific group of people has an access to the following list of accounts. They can make transaction only to this address, which is the whitelist. If they want to make transaction to another address, they can, but they need to gather 3 approvals out of 5. One of them must be the CFO above a certain threshold. Like all this governance can be implemented on top of Ledger Vault, and it's completely chosen by the organization. The organization has different needs in terms of governance. They use different type of accounts. Some wallet could be very hard, so everything is automated. Everything can be controlled through API, but you will only leave like 5% of your treasury in this hot wallet, maximum 5%, let's say. And for the rest, you will want more governance and more controls when it comes to doing transaction from these colder wallets. So this is really what can be built with Ledger Vault, all this governance framework. And you also have the trusted display property, which is important. When you consent for a specific action, you want to understand what kind of action you consent. And this is why we are giving to Ledger Vault customers a personal security device, which is basically like a hardware wallet, but the seed is not inside the hardware wallet. You just use it for authenticating yourself to the platform and to have the trusted display and consent the approvals you're about to do. And finally, we are using HSM for hardware security module, which is the standard in traditional finance.
That's amazing. So the idea is that the folks working at the company will all have different devices, and depending on where you sit within the hierarchy, you're able to spend a certain amount or to spend a certain amount to a specific recipient. And then, once you go over specific thresholds, you need more approvals. It's kind of like a normal purchase order process in a company, right? But that's just the blockchain version of that, with obviously multi-signature and ultimately, providing you also with the ability to access different services. Do you want to get into that? Because it's not only about, holding the assets. You also have the ability to benefit from a set of different services if you wish to.
Yeah, totally. We have integrated the Ethereum ecosystem quite finely. And we have something called smart contract interaction. So you can connect your vault to Uniswap if you want. And as soon as you will do decentralized swap with Uniswap, then according to your governance rule, either you can do any swap on your own, or you can define threshold, you can define a different set of rules for granting certain rights to a certain user. And again, Ledger DNA, you will have on your device, on the trusted display, a confirmation of the transaction you're about to do. You're about to swap this amount of Ethereum on Uniswap against USDT or something, and then you can verify on the device. So Uniswap is only an example. We have integrated all the smart contract. We have a generic way to discuss with smart contract, to interact with smart contracts with security, and also we are supporting plenty of blockchains. To be honest, I don't even have the number in mind, but we are supporting plenty of blockchain on Ledger Vault as well. And there is something else we are working on, which is very important and that has a lot of traction, that is called TradeLink. The idea of trading is to create a technical and legal framework where a hedge fund or any organization who wants to do trading on an exchange but doesn't really want to put their funds on this exchange, because in traditional finance there is this distinction, like exchange and custody are a different entity because the regulation force this. In crypto, this is not the case. When you want to trade with an exchange, you have to send your funds to this exchange, and then at the end you hope that you will be able to withdraw. Most of the time it works. Sometimes FTX happen, and then you can't withdraw, and then you are in a difficult situation. And this is what we want to solve with trading. So we are putting in place a setup where you have the hedge fund, the exchange, and a custodian in between. So you will put your funds in an escrow account with the custodian. You will do as many trades as you want, and at some point you will do what is called clearing and settlement. So we compute the balance. So you did this trade, and at the end I owe to the exchange this amount of Bitcoin, and the exchange owes me this amount of Ethereum, and then the custodian will settle the position so that the exchange is paid, and as an hedge fund I'm paid also. But it removes the counterparty risk that you would have trading directly on the exchange. So this is really the idea of trading, and for now there is no regulation forcing us to do that, forcing exchange to do that, but this is the direction of the history. This is where the industry is going, and when we are talking about that in the market, the players are really keen on using this framework.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely fascinating. If you think about the future, probably every organization in the world will have digital assets on its balance sheet, and they definitely need the framework to be able to hold those assets securely, to be able to govern them, and then to be able to, leverage on those assets, whether it be to trade or to stake. And probably there will be multiple other services that will, come to fruition in the future. So Charles, in a moment, we'll be chatting with Mike Schmidt, the executive director of Brink.dev. We're proud to be partnering with them until October 21st, donating $5 for every purchase of a Ledger Nano S Plus to Bitcoin developers. And you were kind of at the inception of this. So can you tell us more about Brink.dev and why you pushed for this Ledger partnership?
Yeah, sure. There was something to understand which is really special with Bitcoin, which is not the case for the other blockchain. There is no Bitcoin Foundation. This thing does not exist with Bitcoin. Bitcoin has not went through an ICO. That was the first, but no ICO at the beginning. So Bitcoin developments, because on different blockchain, what you see is that the foundation has a big amount of money, of tokens of the blockchain, and they use this money to fund the developer, to make sure the developer community grows and has enough resources to progress. But this is not the case with Bitcoin. There is no Bitcoin Foundation. This thing does not exist. And Bitcoin developments are based on volunteering and donation. And there are a few organizations, including Brink, that provides grants and fellowship to fund the development of Bitcoin. So for us, it's really important to support Bitcoin ecosystem as a whole, and using Brink for this was the straightforward option for us. They are supporting the Bitcoin developer community through funding on one side, also through education. Again, education is something very, very important in our space. We are at Ledger, we are spending a lot of time and resources for that, and this is really important. The blockchain, Bitcoin, is a big paradigm shift, and understanding it is not that easy. So it's also part of our mission to help people to understand things. And also they are doing some mentoring, so they are very deep in the Bitcoin community and Bitcoin development. So that was important for us to participate to Bitcoin development. So we just wanted to humbly participate in this journey, and this partnership was a good vector to do that.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles. We'll hope to see you soon again for our monthly recap. And there you have it, folks, a recap of Bitcoin Amsterdam with Ledger CDO Charles Guillemet. Let's continue our journey into the fascinating world of Bitcoin developers with Mike Schmidt from Brink.dev. Hello, Mike. Welcome to the show. How's it going?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So we just got off with Charles, and we briefly touched on, Brink earlier, and I just wanted you to give us a deeper understanding of what Brink is, and maybe tell us the story of how it came to life.
Yeah, first to describe Brink briefly, we're a charitable organization. We have a 501c3 status in the US, and we have a mission of supporting open source developers that are working on Bitcoin. And so not building on top of Bitcoin or building a business or building something that uses Bitcoin, but the actual Bitcoin core software that underpins much of the Bitcoin network. We want to support the developers working on that common good for the industry. And we're funded 100% from community donations. We don't have any source of funding other than the community's willingness to support us. So whether that's individuals like folks sending us sats over Lightning, or whether that's Jack Dorsey, who recently made a donation, or whether that's Bitcoin businesses like folks like you, folks like Ledger, who are supporting our efforts. We're totally community funded, and those donations then allow us to support the developers working on Bitcoin Core. So we focus on Bitcoin software, specifically Bitcoin Core, and some of the research and development around that piece of software. Right now, we're funding 8 developers, and 7 of those developers are full-time. And we have an office in London where some of the folks work together and share knowledge. Obviously, Bitcoin development and Bitcoin in general is a global thing, and developers are spread throughout the globe. But we've heard from our grantees, as well as some other developers, that being in person with other experts really provides a way to collaborate and level up. So we also have an office in London for our grantees. And the question about the genesis of Brink, I've been a long-time contributor to Bitcoin Optech. We're an educational resource around Bitcoin and Lightning technology. Folks may be familiar with our weekly newsletter covering developments in the Bitcoin and Lightning spaces. And if you're not, check that out at bitcoinops.org. And so I've been contributing there for several years, and I met John Newberry, who was one of the Bitcoin Core developers at the time, and we had been both contributing for several years. And this was in 2020, and we thought it was a good opportunity to spin up an organization that was a charitable donation specifically for funding Bitcoin developers. There was other sources of funding at the time, so you had folks are probably familiar with Blockstream funding some developers, Chaincode had been funding some developers, and we thought it would be nice to provide a conduit for the community to fund development work. And so that was the genesis of Brink, and that was about 3 years ago now. And we feel like we've fulfilled on our mission, and our goal is to continue to support strong developers that are building Bitcoin.
That's awesome. I love a lot about what you said. It's like a decentralized community. You exist, probably in all continents, or at least lots of different regions around the world. But you also have like this physical place where people can actually get to meet and collaborate. But maybe you mentioned Bitcoin Core developers a few times, and let's try to help out the folks that aren't tech savvy and probably listening to this episode. Who are Bitcoin Core developers, and why are they so crucial to the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks have similar questions, even folks who are hardcore Bitcoiners, is what are these Bitcoin Core developers doing? And I think from the perspective of Bitcoin users, and that could be hodlers, dissidents using Bitcoin inside oppressive regimes, folks building on Bitcoin, or just folks using Bitcoin for their day-to-day transactions. I think what we're all here for is the permissionless, censorship-resistant nature of the Bitcoin network. And so much of what the Bitcoin Core developers do in a day-to-day basis is work in service to preserve and enhance that censorship-resistant properties. And so there's a bunch of categories of things that you could say that they do. The nice thing is that the repository for Bitcoin Core is on GitHub, and you can actually see a lot of these changes for yourself. But to digest maybe a few of them for the audience, in order to have a censorship-resistant network, we want to make sure that everyone can run a node, and we make it as easy as possible for folks to run a node. So you have that decentralization, which facilitates the permissionless censorship nature of the network. And so an example of that at a technical level is, obviously performance improvements to the software. So it's easy for folks to run, making sure that the software can run on the latest version of the operating systems, and that some change in Mac OS doesn't break Bitcoin, which actually there was some issues with that. And you need to make sure that it runs on Mac, right? So you need somebody who has expertise of doing that. Keeping the resource requirements low for Bitcoin Core. Actually, in the last few weeks, there was a bunch of work merged into the Bitcoin Core code base around this Assume UTXO project. And that's been in the works for a few years now, and there's been several contributors to that. But the whole point of that is to make it easier to get a node up and running. It very much improves the user experience. So if you have the experience of running Bitcoin Core in the past, sometimes it can take a while to download the whole blockchain, and so you can get up and running on what you're trying to do with Bitcoin Core. Well, with Assume UTXO, once that's available for download, you'll be able to get up and running much quicker. And so the user experience is great. So then you install the software and you're kind of off to the races, and the blockchain will be downloaded in the background. So that, that's one example of making it a little bit more accessible for people and encouraging people to run a node. I think another thing that the developers are working on is just general testing and bug fixing. And that's not just testing new code or proposed code changes to the software, but that also involves things like looking at the existing code and running tests against that code to see if there are potential vulnerabilities there that potentially have been there for a while. And so we have one of our grantees, Nicholas, actually works a lot on fuzz testing, which is this notion of throwing quasi-random inputs into the Bitcoin Core software and seeing if there's some combination of those inputs that could potentially cause an issue or cause a crash or cause some sort of an anomaly. And so, work like that obviously is important, and I think all Bitcoin users would want their core development team focused on things like that, uncovering bugs, fixing bugs, performance testing. And one other category of thing, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but there are some privacy initiatives as well. So right now, folks who are running a node, your node is talking to other nodes on the network, getting information about transactions and blocks that are propagating. All that communication is being done unencrypted in plain text. So if you have observers of the network looking at that traffic, there are potential privacy concerns, and there are certain types of attacks that having that open dialogue viewable to anybody can cause. And so there's a project that some folks have been working on for several years that also has gotten merged in the last few weeks. It's called BIP 324. It's encrypted transport. And so now in a very backwards compatible way, you can run a node on the network, and if it finds other nodes that can speak this encrypted protocol, it'll start speaking in encrypted instead of open text. So cutting off, raising the cost for certain attackers to do man-in-the-middle attacks or privacy-related attacks. So these are the kind of things, big projects and small projects that if you look at the GitHub and the discussions on the mailing list that these developers are focused on. So I think we could all agree that it's valuable work for the protocol and for the project.
Yeah, that's super insightful because when you think about like Bitcoin, a lot of people think that it's kind of static, and that's actually a feature because like the resilience and the security of the network comes with less numbers of changes. But what most people probably don't realize is that even if you don't change what's happening on the blockchain, there's a whole ecosystem of different touch points that need to be enhanced in order to make sure that the user experience is actually, progressing and evolving with different products that you can use or different features that enable you to, transact more privately or, access the blockchain through other portals.
Yeah, I
And
think
that's super interesting.
it's an important distinction. I think sometimes I see Twitter dialogue that, why are there even Bitcoin developers? The protocol's in stone, this sorts of discussion. And all of the things that I just mentioned, and in fact, all of the changes to the Bitcoin Core repository in the last year plus have all been non-consensus, non-protocol changes that can enhance the value of the Bitcoin protocol by improving the decentralization, privacy, etc., that we talked about without having to touch the protocol.
So from October the 17th until October 31st, every Ledger Nano S Plus Orange purchase on Ledger.com contributes a donation to Brink. So can you break down how these donations are put to use and what specific areas they will help fund?
Well, yeah. First of all, thank you to you and the Ledger team for wanting to support Bitcoin open source. Um, I think it's the foundation of what underpins our industry and probably the larger crypto industry at whole. And so kudos to you guys for seeing value in contributing to open source. So thank you for that. In terms of any donations that Ledger or any of the listeners or viewers to this show make, 100% of the funds that are donated, whether that's in Bitcoin or via Lightning or fiat, goes to the developers. Brink is in a fortunate position that our administrative costs were handled by some founding sponsors. So even things like forming the not-for-profit organization and paying for lawyers and auditors and things like this, though those came out of our founding sponsors' donations. And so all new donations go directly towards the grantees that are working on the types of things that we outlined earlier, whether that's Nicholas and his fuzz testing that we talked about. There's some important work that Sebastian, also known as the Stack on GitHub, is doing a lot of review work. You have Gloria and her work towards package relay that's going to improve fee management and layer 2 protocols like Lightning. So those folks are the beneficiaries of all these donations. So thank you.
Shout out to all of the folks you mentioned. I think everyone appreciates their work. Um, but it's actually something that most people might, ask themselves this question is, how would the actual Bitcoin developers manage to sustain themselves and continue their work without organizations such as Brink or others in the space?
Sure. Yeah. One way to think about open source is that either the developers are donating their time, maybe they have an interest in the technicals of it, or they have some moral imperative themselves that they want to work on this technology. But at the end of the day, they're donating their time. Or organizations and individuals are donating money to support them to be able to allocate their time to work on the Bitcoin software. So, when Bitcoin was originally announced and released, and in the years after that, there was no such thing as getting compensated for your work on Bitcoin. It was very much the former category of folks donating their time to work on this, work on the protocol. And over the years, then Bitcoin Foundation, I think, came along and was funding a couple different developers. And we've sort of continued that trajectory now through Brink, who's funding 8 developers, and you have organizations like OpenSats that are now starting to fund Bitcoin developers. You have Block, who through their initiatives are also funding developers, Blockstream, Chaincode. So you love to see that the space has matured beyond just volunteers spending their time on it, that we can actually compensate people so that they can spend a higher percentage of their day on Bitcoin instead of just nights and weekends. And it's also nice to see, based on that, and that was only a brief list of some of the folks contributing, that the funding itself even is decentralized and voluntary through a variety of not-for-profits as well as for-profits as well as startups. So
the funding is also decentralized, which means that all the folks listening to us can actually participate in that. And I assume there are a variety of different ways through which they could contribute to it. But one of them is actually, buying the orange Ledger Nano S Plus. Could you share some of these other ways through which people could contribute, resources?
Yeah, obviously, as somebody who's curious about the technicals and wanting to onboard new developers, one way that folks can contribute is actually learning the technicals and wanting to actually contribute their time and expertise. If you have a background in computer science or testing or review or C++, that's one way to do it. All the way up through, obviously direct donations financially. So we take on our website, we can take Stripe payments, we can do recurring credit card charges, Lightning, Bitcoin, and you can contact us if you want to do a wire transfer. So I think anywhere in between is an opportunity to contribute. If you want to contribute your time, there's plenty of resources. And in fact, one of the things that Brink grantees do is help facilitate educational resources for younger developers to learn about the Bitcoin protocol, the Bitcoin core software. We have initiatives that our grantees contribute to there's one called Bitcoin Core PR Review Club, where you have folks like Peter Wolla and Gloria from our team in a chat channel talking about a particular proposed change to the code base and how they think about it and questions that they would ask and how they would think about this particular change. And so you get, quote unquote, FaceTime with these senior developers who are there to educate younger developers about how to contribute. And so I would encourage people who are curious to do that. And otherwise, follow along with the developments, follow Brink on Twitter, follow Bitcoin Optech and stay up to date, because I think educated Bitcoiners are valuable to the ecosystem more so than just maybe folks who are disinterested in not learning the technicals.
Amazing. Thank you, Mike, for sharing these fascinating insights about Brink, and congratulations on the significant role that you guys play in supporting the overall Bitcoin ecosystem.
Thanks to Ledger for your contribution.
Speak soon.
Cheers.
And that's it, folks. This brings us to another end of an exciting episode of On the Ledger. We've delved deep into the world of Bitcoin governance, met some of the brilliant minds at Brink, and discovered how crucial their work is for the Bitcoin ecosystem. We hope you've enjoyed this as much as we have, and as always, stay tuned for more insights and updates from the Ledger universe. Until next time, take care. Au revoir. This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion, and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.